There are women who spend their whole lives being taught they are invisible. Tonight, one of them was about to teach an entire kingdom how wrong they had been. But that comes later. That comes 6 months from now, when Maren walks through the great doors of Nightmore, with her chin lifted and her strange eyes catching the candlelight, and every wolf in that hall forgets how to breathe. For now, go back. Back to the beginning. Back to the girl pressed against cold stone in the darkest corner of a hall that was never built for her. The grand gathering of the packs came once a year. Every wolf of standing in the northern kingdoms came to Nightmore to drink and boast, and measure themselves against one another. Silk against silk, crown against crown. And in the middle of all that glittering wealth stood Maren in the only dress she owned, faded linen, patched at the elbow. A hem she had mended herself by candlelight months ago with thread that didn't quite match. She was barefoot, because the shoes she owned had fallen apart on the road, and there had been no coin for new ones. So she pressed her bare feet against the stone and tried to make herself small, which was a skill she had practiced her entire life. Her dark hair fell loose over her face, and that was on purpose too, because behind that curtain of curls were her eyes. And her eyes were the problem. They had always been the problem, one gold, warm like honey held up to a flame, one silver, cold like the moon on water, different, wrong, cursed. She'd heard all the words. She'd learned to lower her gaze before anyone could say them out loud. The Thornvale pack had not come to Nightmore for honor. Thornvale had no honor to display. They had come because they had been summoned, and you did not refuse a summons from the Alpha King. So they stood at the edges where the poor packs always stood and hoped to leave before anyone noticed them at all. Maren wanted nothing from that night. Nothing but to survive it. To slip out when the dancing began and disappear back into the forest, back to the small, hungry life that was at least hers. And then it happened. It came without warning. It came like a bolt of white fire straight through the center of her chest, and Maren gasped, her hand flying to her heart. Her knees buckled. The wall was the only thing that kept her standing. It wasn't pain. That was the strange part. It was the opposite of pain. It was connection. It was recognition. It was every lonely year of her life answered all at once, and something deep inside her, something wild, something she had kept caged so long she'd almost forgotten it was there, lifted its head and howled a single word. Mate. The word rang through her like a struck bell. Undeniable. Sacred. Hers. Maren lifted her head. For the first time in years, she didn't care who saw her eyes. She was searching, frantic, following a pull that had wrapped itself around her ribs and was dragging her forward toward the center of the hall, toward the source of that impossible warmth. And she saw him. I was standing near the dais, mid-conversation, a goblet forgotten in his hand. Black hair loose over broad shoulders. Dark eyes. The kind of face that was made to command a room and knew it. Around his brow, a circlet of dark iron. The Alpha King of Nightmore, Kale. He had gone completely still. She could see it even from across the hall. He had felt it too. Of course he had felt it too. The bond was not a thing that struck one heart and spared the other. He felt it, and she watched the goblet slip from his fingers and clatter against the stone, and she watched him turn. Their eyes met, and for one breath, one single shining breath, Maren believed her whole life had been leading to this, that every cruel word, every averted stare, Every night she had cried herself to sleep had all been the price for this one moment when the gods themselves would stand and say, in front of everyone, she was chosen. She was wanted. She was enough. She held that breath like it was the last warm thing on earth. And Kael crossed the hall toward her. The crowd parted for him, the way water parts for a stone. He came down off the dais and walked, and with every step the bond between them pulsed harder, brighter, until Maren could feel it singing in her teeth. Her wolf pressed against her skin, desperate, joyful. Almost there, almost home. Except she saw his face change. She was young, and she was hopeful, and she did not yet understand what she was watching. But she would understand it soon. Because what crossed Kael's face as he drew close enough to truly see her was not joy. It was horror. His gaze swept over her slow, deliberate cataloging. The patched dress, the bare feet on his stone floor, the wild, dark hair that no one had ever taught her to tame. And then when she lifted her chin, in trembling hope her eyes. One gold, one silver. She saw him flinch, small, almost nothing. But she saw it. Kael, she whispered. His name. First time she had ever spoken it. You feel it too. I know you feel it. And he did. She could see the war of it in him. His jaw was clenched so hard, the muscle jumped. His hands had curled into fists at his sides. The bond wanted him the way it wanted her. She could feel it, straining across the space between them, begging, pleading mine, mine, mine. I was fighting it. She just didn't understand, yet why a man would ever fight a thing so sweet. This, Kael said, and his voice came out cold. Loud enough that the nearest wolves turned to listen. This must be some kind of mistake. The warmth in Maren's chest flickered. The gods, he said, could not have given me you. And there it was, the first crack. She should have run then. Some older, wiser part of her, the part that had survived a lifetime of scorn, knew she should have turned and fled before he could finish. But hope is a stubborn thing. Hope kept her rooted to that cold stone floor. Hope made her say the worst possible words. But the bond. Or look at you. He took a step back. Made distance. Made a show of it. Rags. You don't even own shoes. Your hair looks like something dragged out of a hedge. His eyes found hers, and held them cruel and steady. And those eyes, those ridiculous mismatched eyes that mark you for exactly what you are. Around them, the whispers began, low, hungry, spreading like fire through dry grass. Thornvale, that poor pack. And those eyes, bad luck, everyone knows it, a curse walking on two legs. Maren felt the tears come. She fought them. She would not let them fall. Not here. Not in front of all these people. Did you truly believe, Kael went on, each word chosen like a blade, that I, the Alpha King of Nightmore, would take someone like you to stand at my side? And here is the thing that no one in that hall could see. Here is the thing that only much later, after all of it, Maren would come to understand. Kael was lying, not about rejecting her. That was real enough. But about why. Because 3 nights before that gathering, an old wolf named Elder Thaddeus had come to Kael in the dark. And Thaddeus had spoken a prophecy, or something dressed up to look like one. A mate marked with a divided gaze, he'd said, will bring the throne of Nightmore to ruin. And Kael, who had been raised from the cradle to believe the kingdom mattered more than his own heart, more than his own happiness, more than the girl the moon had chosen for him. Kael had believed it. So when he looked at Marin's gold and silver eyes, he did not only see a poor girl in a patched dress, he saw the end of everything he had sworn to protect. And that is why, at the very edge of his cruelty, in a voice so low that not one soul in that hall could hear it, Kael whispered 2 words as he looked at her. "Forgive me." Marin didn't hear them. She only saw his lips move and mistook it for one more insult. He straightened. He turned to the crowd, and he made his voice ring out to the rafters because in Nightmore, a rejection spoken before witnesses could never be undone. "I, Kael Alpha, King of Nightmore, reject you, Marin of Thornvale, as my mate." He drew a breath. His hands at his sides were shaking. No one noticed but the shadows. "You are not worthy to stand beside me. I renounce the bond." And the bond screamed. There is no other word for it. It tore. It ripped down the center of Marin's chest like something living being pulled in two, and the fire that had felt so sweet a moment ago turned to acid, to glass, to burning. She screamed. She couldn't help it. Her knees hit the stone, and she folded over herself, arms wrapped around her middle, as if she could hold the pieces of her soul together with nothing but her own 2 hands. Across from her, Kael stood perfectly still. His face was carved from stone. His jaw was locked. Cold sweat slid down his temple, and he did not wipe it away, because a king does not show weakness. And if he moved even 1 inch, he knew he would fall to his knees beside her and beg her to forgive him and take it all back and doom them both. So he did not move. He watched the girl the moon had chosen for him shatter on his own floor, and he let her. Somewhere in the crowd, someone laughed. "Take her out of here," Kael said, and his voice came out rougher than he meant it to. He cleared his throat, made it hard again. "She's making a scene." An old she-wolf stepped out of the crowd. Gray-haired, stooped with years. She knelt beside Marin without hesitation, without disgust, and gathered the trembling girl against her side. "Up you get, child," she murmured. "Up now. Away from all this." Her name was Agatha. Nan Agatha, the younger wolves called her, though no one seemed to know which pack she'd come from. And as she half-carried Marin toward the great doors, past all those staring faces, she leaned close to the girl's ear and said something Marin would carry for the rest of her life. "You're not broken, my girl. You hear me?" A fierce whisper. "You're not broken. You just haven't met the one who knows how to look at you yet." Then the doors closed behind them, and Marin was gone. The night air hit her like cold water. She sagged against the outer wall of the castle and slid down it until she was sitting on the frozen ground, and Nan Agatha lowered herself down beside her, with her grunt joints cracking, and simply sat, not speaking. Just there, the physical pain was already fading to a dull, endless ache. It was the other pain that grew. The shame. He had looked at her in front of everyone and named every flaw out loud, one by one, so the whole world could hear. He'd called her cursed. He'd said she brought shame. The words looped in her head over and over, each pass cutting deeper than the last. "What will you do now?" Nan Agatha asked after a long while. Marin wiped her face with the back of her hand. It was useless. The tears kept coming. "Leave," she whispered. "Leave anywhere." Her voice cracked. "Anywhere that no one knows my name. No one knows my eyes. No one knows that not even my own fated mate could stand to look at me." The old wolf was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into the folds of her worn shawl and pressed something into Marin's hands. A heel of dark bread wrapped in cloth, still faintly warm from wherever she'd tucked it against her body. "Eat that first," Nan Agatha said. "You can't outrun anything on an empty stomach. And child," she waited until Marin looked up, until those gold and silver eyes, red-rimmed and swimming, met her own. "Wherever you're running to, someday it's going to turn out you were running toward something, not just away." Marin didn't believe her, but she took the bread. And then she stood every movement its own small agony, and she walked into the trees, and she did not look back. The forest swallowed her whole. Tall pines closed overhead and blotted out the moon. Roots caught at her bare feet. Sharp stones opened cuts on her soles, and she felt them, and she kept walking anyway, because the pain outside was easier to bear than the pain within. She walked until she couldn't walk, and then her body made a decision her mind was too broken to make. The shift took her. It wasn't a choice. It was survival. Pure and animal bones cracking and reshaping skin splitting into fur, the whole world tilting as she dropped to 4 legs. Normally the shift was quick. A breath of pain and then release. But with the bond still torn open and bleeding inside her, it was agony drawn out into eternity. When it was over, she stood in the dark on trembling paws. Small, smaller than most she-wolves, dark as the shadows she'd spent her life hiding in. And her eyes stayed exactly as they were. 1 gold, 1 silver. "Burning in the black, run," said the wolf, "survive." So she ran. She ran through the endless night, her injured paws leaving small dark prints on the frost. She crossed streams so cold they stole the feeling from her legs. She climbed slopes that tore at her pads and pushed through thickets that raked her flanks, and she crossed borders she didn't know existed until the very air changed cleaner, colder, the scent of a strange forest she had never breathed before. By the time the sun rose, painting the sky in pink and gold, Marin had nothing left. She found a great old tree with roots that arched up from the ground, making a small hollow at its base. Just a few minutes, she told herself, staggering toward it. Just to rest. Just to close my eyes. She curled into the root's nose tucked beneath her tail and let the darkness take her. Voices woke her, 2 of them, male, close. And by the time Marin surfaced from the deep well of sleep, they were already there. 2 men stepping out from between the trees, big men in worn leather bows across their backs. Hunters. Danger, her wolf snarled, but her body was too stiff, too spent to obey. She tried to rise and managed only to stagger back against the tree trunk. "Well," said the older one, the one with the gray-streaked beard. "Would you look at that? Too small for a male. Must be a female." "She's hurt," said the younger, keeping his distance. A scar ran white across his cheek. "Look at her paws. She's bleeding." Marin tried to growl. A warning. Back away. What came out was a thin, pathetic whine, and she hated herself for it. And then, she made her mistake. She was frightened, and she was desperate, and she did the only thing she could think of. She lifted her head and looked straight at them, praying the sight of a cornered creature would make them think twice. Both men froze, because they saw her eyes. 1 gold, 1 silver. The younger man stumbled back a full step, his hand flying up to make a sign against evil. "By the moon," he breathed. Her eyes are wrong." The older man went pale, but the fear on his face curdled fast into something worse, something colder. "Mismatched," he said, and spat on the ground. Cursed. My gran told me about creatures like this. They bring death, ruin, misfortune to any who let them live. Marin tried to back away. There was nowhere left to go. The tree was already at her spine. "We can't let it loose," the young one said, and his voice climbed toward panic. "We can't." "No," the old one agreed. "We can't." And here is a thing that Marin would only learn much, much later in a warm room, in a kingdom she hadn't yet reached. Here is a thing she could not have known as she stood shaking against that tree. Those men were not there by chance. They had been paid. Paid in good silver 3 nights before by a woman in a red dress with golden hair and cold, careful eyes. A woman who had watched a poor girl from Thornvale get rejected in a great stone hall, and understood in the way that frightened people understand that a broken bond is not always a dead one. That fate has a way of circling back. And that the surest way to keep a rival gone was to make certain she never came back at all. Her name was Delphine, and she meant to be Luna of Nightmore, and she did not intend to let a barefoot girl with strange eyes stand in her way. But Marin didn't know any of that. She only knew the boot. It caught her in the ribs and sent her rolling across the frozen ground, and pain exploded white behind her eyes. She tried to rise. The younger man kicked her front leg, and she heard something crack, felt the bone give, and the whine that tore out of her was raw and desperate, and did not sound like anything at all. "Cursed thing!" the old man snarled and kicked her again. "You should have died the day you were born." They dragged her by the scruff across the ground, and she had no strength to fight it, and the sound of running water grew louder in her ears until she understood. A stream. They were taking her to the stream. "Here," said the old man. "Leave it here." They threw her down onto the bank. Her body slammed against smooth, wet stones and knocked what little air remained from her lungs. She lay there, unable to move, watching the world through a blur, watching the old man raise his boot one final time. He brought it down on her ribs. She heard them break. She felt the water begin to soak into her fur, cold as death. And the last thought that moved through Marin's fading mind was not anger. It was not even fear. It was this: Kyle was right. I was always cursed. I was always going to end like this. Then the darkness took her. And here is where the story would have ended. Here is where a poor girl with strange eyes, rejected by fate and beaten by strangers, would have slipped quietly out of the world, and no one who mattered would ever have known her name. Her wolf's body wanted to heal. It was trying even then the way a wolf's body always tries. But the broken bond had done something deeper than break her ribs. It had broken the healing itself from the inside, snuffed out the ancient fire that let her kind mend from wounds that would kill a human 10 times over. So she lay in the cold water and did not heal, and she waited to die. Except a wolf was running, some distance to the east across the border she'd crossed in the dark, without knowing, in a kingdom called Dawn Hollow. An alpha king had woken before dawn with a restlessness he could not name. Not fear, not worry. Something deeper, something in the blood. His name was Corwin, and he was a man who had learned over a hard and lonely handful of years not to trust the strange pulls of his own heart, because the last time his heart had pulled him towards something, it had ended in a grave. A wife, a child never born, a whole future buried in a single winter, and a man who had walked out of that season believing the part of him made for love had been laid to rest with them. He had built a wall around that part of himself, stone by stone, and he had told himself it would stand forever. But this morning, something had reached over the wall and shaken him awake. He dressed in the dark. He walked out through the castle gates, and the moment he passed beneath them, he shifted golden fur gleaming pale in the first gray light, and he ran. I didn't know where he was going. He only knew that his wolf would not be still, that every instinct in him was pointed east toward the stream that marked the edge of his lands, pulling, insisting, faster, faster. And then the wind changed, and he smelled blood. Corwin ran flat-out powerful legs eating the ground, and the scent grew stronger with every stride, until he broke through the last line of trees and skidded to a halt on the stream bank. And there she was, a small she-wolf, dark fur soaked black with water and blood, broken, still, one foreleg at an angle no living leg should bend. Her ribs caved in on one side, and the water around her running faintly, terribly red. He shifted back to a man before he'd finished thinking about it, and dropped to his knees beside her, and reached out with hands that shook, alive. Barely. So barely he almost missed it. But there, the faintest rise and fall of her ruined side. She was still breathing. Who did this? The thought came cold and furious and complete. Who beats a small, injured creature half to death and leaves her in a stream to die? He would find them. Later. He swore it in that instant with a rage that surprised him. But first, she had to live long enough for there to be a later. I gathered her into his arms. She was so light. Too light even for a small she-wolf, the lightness of a body that had gone too long without enough to eat. And as he shifted her against his chest, her head lolled and her eyes opened. Just for a moment. Just a single flicker of awareness before they closed again. But it was long enough. Corwin went very still there on his knees in the freezing water, cradling a stranger against his heart. Because one of her eyes was gold, like honey held to a flame, and the other was silver, like the moon on water, and something in him, something that had been sleeping under stone for years, something he had believed was dead and buried in a winter grave, turned over in its sleep, and began very quietly to wake. "I've got you," he whispered to the unconscious girl in his arms. His voice was rough. He didn't know why his eyes were burning. "You hear me? I've got you now. You're not going to die out here." He rose to his feet, holding her as carefully as if she were made of glass. And he turned back toward the castle. And he ran, measured now, controlled every step chosen, so as not to jostle the broken thing he carried, ran through the graying dawn, with a dying stranger held against his chest, and a promise already forming hard and certain in the center of him. Not this one. This one lives. The guards at the gate straightened when they saw their king. Then they saw what he carried, and their faces changed. "Send for the healer," Corwin ordered, and his voice did not shake now, because a king's voice cannot shake when lives hang on it. "Tell her it's an emergency. Prepare a room in the recovery wing. Go." They went. He carried her up the wide stone steps, and the servants fell back before him with wide eyes, and by the time he reached the recovery wing, the healer was already waiting. An old, capable woman who took one look at the bundle in his arms and breathed a curse under her breath. "By the moon," she said. "What happened to her?" "Found her at the eastern stream." He laid the she-wolf down on the clean bed, with a gentleness that made the healer glance up sharp and curious. "Beaten, left to die. How long ago I don't know. The blood was still fresh. The healer's hands were already moving, probing, assessing. "Another hour in that water," she said grimly, "and you'd have found a body. Cold and blood loss, both. Can you save her?" "I can try." She was setting out her instruments, rolling up her sleeves. "The leg's a bad break. The ribs are worse. And there's something else, something wrong with her healing. She should be mending already, and she's not." She glanced up. "This is going to be long, and it's going to be ugly. You don't need to be here for it." Corwin's wolf bristled at the thought of leaving. Every instinct he had wanted to plant himself at that bedside and not move until he knew she would live, which made no sense at all. She was a stranger. He had pulled a dozen wounded wolves from a dozen bad ends over the years, and never once felt this pull, this need, this thing sitting hot and insistent behind his ribs. He made himself step back. "Save her," he said quietly. "Whatever it costs, whatever she needs, she has it." Then he walked out into the corridor, and he leaned against the cold stone wall, and he waited. "Why does this matter so much?" he asked himself in the long gray hours while the healer worked behind that door. "She's a stranger. You've helped others. You've never felt like this. It's because she was so broken, he decided. So close to death. Anyone would feel this. But even as he told himself that he knew it wasn't the whole of it, because he kept seeing them every time he closed his eyes. Those two impossible colors opening for one flickering moment in a dying face. One gold, one silver. Extraordinary. Some voice in him whispered a voice he hadn't heard in years, a voice he'd thought was gone for good. It was hours before the healer came out. Corwin was on his feet before the door had fully opened. "She's alive," the healer said, and he felt the breath he'd been holding for half a day finally leave him. "Stable. For now. I've cleaned the wound, set the leg, bound the ribs. She's sleeping." She wiped her hands on a cloth and gave him a long, level look. "It'll be weeks, Corwin. And that's if the healing catches. She'll need care, constant care, for a good while yet. She'll have it. Corwin." The healer's voice softened, and she said his name the way an old friend says it, without the crun. "Who is she?" And the Alpha King of Dawn Hollow looked at the closed door behind which a broken stranger slept, and gave the only honest answer he had. "I don't know," he said, "but I'm going to find out. When she wakes." She woke to sunlight. That was the first strange thing, because for as long as Maren could remember, she had woken to cold. To the gray light of a drafty room, to the ache of an empty stomach, to the particular loneliness of a life no one wanted. But this was warm, golden. Light spilling through a real window onto a real bed, soft beneath her clean linen against her skin. For one confused moment, she thought she had died, that this was whatever came after. Then the pain arrived, and she knew she was very much alive. She tried to sit up and gasped as her ribs screamed in protest. And that was when she noticed she was not a wolf anymore. She was a woman. The shift must have happened in the way it sometimes did when a body was healing. Someone had dressed her in a simple linen nightgown. Someone had bound her ribs, splinted her arm, cleaned the dried blood from her hair. Someone had cared for her while she slept. The door opened. A man stepped in, tall, golden-haired, blue-eyed, carrying a cup in one hand, and stopped dead the moment he saw her looking back at him. Maren's whole body went rigid with fear. She scrambled back against the headboard, ignoring the tearing pain in her side, because the last men she had seen had left her broken in a stream, and her heart could not tell the difference yet. "Easy." He held up both hands, set the cup down, did not come closer. Easy. You're safe. No one here is going to hurt you. She stared at him, chest heaving, saying nothing. My name is Corwin, he said. Quiet. Careful like a man approaching a wounded thing that might bolt or bite. I'm the Alpha King of Dawn Hollow. You're in my castle, in the recovery wing. A pause. I found you at the Eastern Stream, 6 days ago. 6 days. You've been asleep most of it, he went on. The healer wasn't sure you'd wake at all. He picked the cup back up slowly and held it out at arm's length. It's just water. You've had nothing but broth for near a week. Maren looked at the cup, then at his face, looking for the trick, looking for the moment his kindness would curdle into contempt the way everyone's always did. She didn't find it, so she took the cup, hands trembling, and drank in small, careful sips, and it was the sweetest water she had ever tasted in her life. There, Corwin said softly. There now. She lowered the cup. And because she had to know, because she had spent her whole life waiting for the other shoe to drop, she made herself ask. You've seen my eyes. It wasn't a question, really. It was a confession. A warning. Here is the thing that's wrong with me, so you can throw me out now and save us both the trouble. Corwin went still, and then he did the last thing on earth she expected. He crouched down beside the bed so that his face was level with hers, so that she could see straight into those clear blue eyes. And he looked at her, really looked at both of them, gold and silver, without flinching, without that small, cruel recoil she had seen on 1,000 faces. I have, he said, and I've never seen anything like them in my life. His voice was rough with something she couldn't name. They're extraordinary. Maren blinked. The word did not compute. It bounced off her like a stone off water, because it did not fit into any world she had ever lived in. Extraordinary, she repeated. Small, disbelieving. They're a curse. People say people, Corwin said, are fools. And something in Maren's chest, some frozen thing that had been locked tight since a great stone hall days and a lifetime ago, cracked. Just slightly. Just enough. The tears came before she could stop them. Silent, sliding down her face and dropping onto the clean linen. And she hated that she was crying in front of a stranger, hated her own weakness, except she couldn't stop, because no one in her entire life had ever looked at those eyes and called them anything but wrong. Corwin didn't tell her not to cry. He didn't fuss or reach for her, or fill the silence with useless words. He just stayed there, crouched beside the bed, a steady presence, and let her weep. I'm sorry, she managed at last, wiping her face. Don't be. He rose. Do you have a name? She hesitated. A name was a thing that could be used against you. But this man had pulled her from a river and called her eyes extraordinary, and so she gave it to him. Maren. He said it slowly, like he was tasting it, like it was worth tasting. It suits you. No one had ever said that, either. The days that followed were the strangest of Maren's life, because nothing bad happened. That was the thing she couldn't get used to. She kept waiting for the cruelty, the cost, the catch. In her experience, kindness was always alone, and the interest was always brutal. So she braced for it. Every morning she woke braced for the day it would all turn. Except it never turned. Corwin came every day. At first the visits were short. He'd check how she was mending, ask if she needed anything, sit for a few minutes' leave. He never pressed her for her story. never asked where she'd come from or who had broken her. He seemed content to let her keep her silences, and somehow that patience did more to earn her trust than 100 prying questions could have. He brought things. Small things. A handful of early berries from the castle garden. A sprig of something green and sweet-smelling tucked into a cup of water beside her bed. A book of maps once when he learned she liked to trace the shapes of far-off places with her fingertip and imagine walking there. And every day the frozen thing in her chest thawed a little more. The healer said her body was mending slower than it should because of that strange wound in her healing but mending. The ribs knitted. The leg freed at last from its splint held her weight when she tried it wobbling on the 8th day, and that was the day Nan Agatha arrived. Maren had thought she'd lost the old she-wolf forever left behind in the dark outside Nightmoor. But it turned out Agatha was not a woman who let go of things easily. She had followed. She had walked for days on old legs asking after a small, dark she-wolf with strange eyes, until the trail led her across a border and up to the gates of Dawn Hollow, where the guards nearly turned her away, until she made such a fuss that word reached the king himself. When she shuffled into the recovery wing and saw Maren sitting up in bed, alive, healing safe, the old woman's face crumpled. "There you are," Nan Agatha said, and her voice broke clean in half. "There you are, my girl." And Maren, who had cried more in the last week than in years before it, had cried again, but this time it was a different kind of crying. Because for the first time in her life, someone had come looking for her. Someone had walked days on aching legs, not to hurt her, not to use her, but simply because she mattered. "You came," Maren whispered when the old woman had folded her into a fierce embrace. "You came for me. Course I came." Agatha pulled back, gripping Maren's face in both weathered hands, thumbs brushing the tears from beneath both mismatched eyes. "Told you, didn't I? You were running toward something." Corwin, standing in the doorway where he'd escorted her up himself, had the grace to look away. From that day, Nan Agatha stayed. She made herself useful in the castle kitchens and a fixture at Maren's bedside, and slowly, without anyone quite deciding it, the three of them became something. Not quite a family. Not yet. But something with the shape of one, which was how the healing truly began. Not just the ribs and the leg. The other thing. The deep thing. When Maren was strong enough to leave the bed, Corwin made her an offer. They were in the garden, her first day out of doors, leaning on Agatha's arm, blinking in the sun. Corwin fell into step beside them, hands clasped behind his back, and for a while they simply walked in the green quiet. Then he said, "Stay." Maren looked up. "In Dawn Hollow," he clarified. "As long as you want. Longer." He paused, choosing his words. "You need a place to rebuild, and I could use your help. With the running of things. Diplomacy planning, seeing what others miss. You've a sharp mind, Maren. I've watched it work these past weeks. It shouldn't go to waste in a sickbed. You don't even know me. I know you crossed 3 kingdoms half dead rather than lie down and quit," Corwin said. "I know you flinch at kindness like it's a raised hand, which tells me more about your life than any story would. And I know you've got eyes that see the world differently than everyone else's." A small smile. "Which in a diplomat is not a curse. It's a gift." Maren stared at him, and in that moment she made a decision that would reshape the whole of her life. "All right," she said. "I'll stay." So began the making of Maren. Corwin was a patient teacher, but he was not a soft one. He started with the body self-defense, The basics: how to move, how to fall, how to make a small frame into a hard target. Because he had seen what she looked like when she was helpless, and he had decided privately that she would never be helpless again. At first, she was terrible at it. She flinched. She hesitated. She apologized when she landed a hit, as if hurting someone even in practice might get her thrown out. But Corwin was endlessly patient, and slowly, week by week, the flinching stopped. The apologies stopped. Her strikes got faster, her footwork surer, her body, remembering strength it had never been allowed to have. And it wasn't only fighting. He taught her strategy, how to read a room, how to hear the thing a person wasn't saying, how to see 3 moves ahead. He brought her into the real work of the kingdom first, with small tasks, then larger, as he watched what she could do. And what she could do was remarkable. She saw patterns others missed. She asked the questions no one else thought to ask. When 2 feuding villages came before the king with a dispute that had stumped his advisors for a month, it was Maren sitting quietly in the corner who noticed that the argument wasn't really about the boundary at all. It was about an old insult. A wedding never attended a wound 30 years deep. She saw it because she knew better than anyone what it was to carry an old wound. And she solved in an afternoon what had festered for a month. "You're good at this," Corwin told her that night, and there was wonder in it. "Better than advisors I've had for years." Maren blushed, but she didn't look away the way she would have once, and she didn't say she wasn't. Because she was starting slowly to believe him. The change in her was not only in what she could do, it was in how she stood. The hunched shoulders straightened. The lowered gaze lifted. She stopped hiding behind her hair. Her hair stopped angling her face to keep her eyes in shadow. When a servant or a courtier looked at those eyes with the old curious wariness, Maren looked right back level and unashamed until they were the ones who dropped their gaze. The months of good food and hard training remade her body too. She gained muscle definition strength. Her too thin frame filled into something strong and graceful. Her skin took on a healthy glow. Her dark hair, properly cared for, now shone. But the greatest change was the one that couldn't be seen. Maren was learning her own worth. And once a woman learns that truly learns it in her bones, there is no unlearning it. There is no going back to the small, silent, hidden creature she used to be. And Corwin watched all of it with a feeling that grew month by month into something he was afraid to name. It happened during a training session in the end. They were sparring close combat, the kind she'd been terrible at just months before. And Maren, quick and sure, now read his shoulder before he moved, ducked under his reach, hooked his ankle, and put the Alpha King of Dawn Hollow flat on his back in the dust. For a heartbeat, she couldn't believe it. Then she stood over him, chest heaving, and a smile broke across her face. Wide, delighted, a real smile, the kind he'd almost never seen from her. "I did it," she breathed. And Corwin lay there in the dirt, looking up at that smile, at those extraordinary eyes, bright with triumph, and felt something turn over hard in his chest. Oh, he thought. Oh no. Because he knew that feeling. He'd felt it once before, a lifetime and a grave ago. He'd built a wall around the place it came from, stone by stone, and sworn nothing would ever get past it again. And here was this woman, this impossible, resilient, luminous woman, standing over him with dust on her hands and light in her eyes. And the wall was already coming down. "I can't," he told himself, getting to his feet, brushing dust from his clothes so he'd have something to do with his hands. "I can't. I had my chance at this once. I buried it. Men like me don't get Corwin." Marin was watching him, head tilted. "You all right?" "Fine," he lied. "You've gotten good is all. Too good. I'm getting old." She laughed, and the sound went straight through the wreckage of his wall like it wasn't even there. And here is the thing about Corwin that Marin did not yet know. The thing he had told no one in years. Once long ago, when he was young and newly crowned, two great packs on his borders had stood on the edge of war. A war that would have burned a generation to ash. And the only peace the elders could broker demanded a price, a binding ritual, ancient and terrible, that fused the two feuding lines and sealed the truce in blood and moonlight. Someone had to anchor it, someone whose own bond could be severed and spent to bind the rest. Corwin had offered himself. He had been young enough to think it noble. He had let them cut the bond sense out of him, that deep animal thread that lets a wolf reach out across a crowded room and know its fated other on sight, and he had poured it into the ritual, and he had ended a war before it began. And he had never felt the bond since. Not with the wife he later chose and buried. Not with anyone. That part of him was ash on an old altar, which meant that everything he felt for Marin, he felt by choice. Not because the moon commanded it, not because fate had chained his soul to hers, but because he had watched her crawl back from death, watched her rebuild herself from ash, watched her become the strongest and kindest and most remarkable person he had ever known, and he had chosen her. Freely, every single day, and that terrified him. Because a bond you could blame on the gods. But a choice was yours. A choice could be refused. A choice could break your heart in a way fate never could. So he said nothing. He carried it in silence month after month, and told himself it was enough just to be near her. But Marin was changing too, in ways she didn't have words for yet. Because at first, Corwin had simply been the king who saved her. Kind, yes. Respectful, yes. But distant, safe. A closed door she was grateful for, but did not think to knock on. Until somewhere in all those months, the distance dissolved. And she began to notice things. The way his blue eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed, which was rare at first, then less rare, as if her presence were teaching him how. The way he tilted his head when he was thinking hard. The way his golden hair fell across his brow when he bent over a map, and how her fingers itched absurdly to brush it back. She noticed how gentle he was with everyone. Servants, guards, the smallest child in the castle courtyard. Not because he had to be, because he was. And she noticed the way he looked at her. Not with pity, not with that flicker of discomfort her eyes drew from most people, but with something warm and steady that made her stomach do a slow, frightening flip she did not understand. No, she told herself. Don't. He's a king. You're just Marin. Except that wasn't true anymore, was it? Because she wasn't just Marin anymore. She was Marin, the king's advisor. Marin, who could put a grown alpha on his back in the dust. Marin, whose counsel was sought, whose eyes were called extraordinary by a man. She was beginning against all her own defenses, too. She stopped that thought before it could finish. She stopped it a great many times. It was on a quiet night in the castle library that the walls between them thinned to almost nothing. Marin was bent over a trade agreement, frowning at a clause that didn't sit right. Corwin came in carrying 2 cups of wine and set one down beside her without a word, and lowered himself into the chair at her side. For a while they simply drank in the warm hush of the room, the fire crackling low, the shelves of old books rising into shadow around them. Then Corwin said, "Can I ask you something? Always." Are you happy here? Marin looked up, surprised. I mean it, he said. I need to know that you stay because you want to, not because you feel you've nowhere else to go. His eyes were on the fire, not on her. I don't ever want to be another person who made your choices for you. And that undid her a little. Because it was such a small thing, and such an enormous thing, and no one had ever cared so much about whether her staying was her own. She thought about it, truly thought. When you found me, she said slowly, I wasn't living. I was just not dying. There's a difference. She turned her cup in her hands. I didn't feel much of anything back then. I was too busy surviving. She lifted her eyes to his. But now I can't imagine being anywhere else. Her voice went quiet and certain. Dawn Hollow is the first place I've ever been that felt like home. A breath. You're the first place that felt like home. The words were out before she could catch them. The fire popped. The silence stretched, charged alive. Corwin turned to look at her, and the air between them seemed to hum. And how, he said low, do you think I see you? Marin swallowed. As someone worth keeping around, I hope. As someone extraordinary, Corwin said. He leaned closer. The firelight caught the blue of his eyes. Strong, clever, brave beyond anything I've known. And he paused, and his gaze moved over her face and dropped just for an instant to her mouth. Beautiful. Marin's heart stopped, and then Corwin pulled back fast, as if he'd startled himself. Forgive me, he said, standing abruptly. That was I shouldn't have. It wasn't my place. He was at the door before she found her voice. Corwin. But he was already gone, and Marin sat alone in the firelight with her heart slamming against her newly healed ribs and a single terrifying, wonderful truth ringing in her ears. He sees me, and oh no, I think She didn't finish that thought either, but she didn't stop it this time. The letter came the next morning. Marin was carrying a stack of documents to Corwin's study when she found him standing at his desk very still, holding a scroll. The wax seal broken bore a crest she would have known anywhere. A black wolf howling beneath a crescent moon. Nightmare. She stopped in the doorway. The blood went cold in her veins. Bad news, she made herself say. Corwin looked up. There was something guarded in his face. An invitation, he said, to a ball, in Nightmare. He hesitated. The Alpha King is presenting his chosen one, as Luna, officially before all the packs, on the next full moon. The room seemed to tilt. Kael, the name she hadn't let herself speak in 6 months, the great stone hall, the eyes that had catalogued her flaws out loud so the whole world could hear. Cursed, shame, not worthy. She waited for the pain to come, bracing for it the way she'd once braced for cruelty. But it didn't come, not the way she expected. Instead, something else rose up in her. Slow, hot, steady as a banked fire. You know about the gathering? Corwin asked, watching her carefully. Everyone does. Her voice came out even, controlled. It's where he'll parade his choice, his future Luna. Her fingers tightened just slightly on the documents in her arms. The one he picked, instead. I was going to refuse, Corwin said, given that you came from there, given what they did to you. I don't want to. I want to go. Corwin blinked. Marin, I want to go, she said again. And now she was looking straight at him, and her strange eyes had gone bright and fierce. 6 months ago, I crawled out of that place half dead, believing every word he said about me, that I was worthless, that I was cursed, that I brought shame just by existing. She set the documents down on the desk with a soft, deliberate finality. I've spent every day since proving that man wrong. To myself. A breath. It's time I proved it to them. You don't owe them anything, Corwin said quietly. You don't have to prove a single thing. Not to anyone who hurt you. I know. A slow smile touched her mouth, something new and steel-bright he'd never seen on her before. That's exactly why I want to. She stepped closer to him around the desk, until there was very little space left between them. Not for them, she said. For me. I want to walk into that hall and look every person who called me cursed dead in the eye. And I want them to see exactly what I've become. She lifted her chin. And I want to walk in on your arm, if you'll have me beside you. Corwin looked at her for a long moment, at this woman. He'd pulled dying from a stream. This woman who'd rebuilt herself from nothing, who'd learned to fight and to lead and to stand, who was asking to walk back into the very place that had broken her, not to hide from it, but to face it, tall and unafraid. And whatever was left of the wall around his heart finished falling silently into dust. The honor, he said, and his voice was rough with everything he wasn't yet saying, would be mine. Marin's smile widened. Wide and warm and real. Then let's go show Nightmare, she said softly, that they underestimated the wrong she-wolf. But even as she said it, even in that shining, defiant moment, neither of them knew what waited in Nightmare, because a woman in a red dress had heard the Alpha King was inviting the Pax. And that same woman remembered a girl she'd paid good silver to make disappear. And when word reached Delphine that Corwin of Dawn Hollow would attend with a mysterious advisor at his side. A woman no one could quite place, a woman with strange and lovely eyes. A cold and careful fear took root in her heart. The girl was supposed to be dead, and Delphine, who had killed once to secure her crown, was already deciding in the quiet, ruthless dark of her mind that she would simply have to do it again. The journey to Nightmare took 2 days by carriage. Marin spent most of it looking out the window, watching the forests roll past. She was going back the way she'd fled. Except this time, she rode in a carriage. This time, she wore silk. This time, there was a man beside her who would have burned the world down before he let anyone lay a hand on her. The dress had been made in Dawn Hollow. Deep emerald green cut to move with her, embroidered in silver thread that caught the light. It matched her eyes, the gold and the silver, both somehow, as if the seamstress had studied her face for hours to get it exactly right. She looked at her reflection in the darkened window and did not recognize the woman looking back. The night before they arrived at an inn on the road, she finally told Corwin the whole of it. The gathering, the bond, the rejection. Every word Kael had spoken out loud, so the world could hear. She told it plainly without tears, and Corwin listened with a stillness that was its own kind of fury. "He's a fool," was all he said when she finished. "Any man who looks at you and sees anything but extraordinary is a blind, damned fool." He reached across the small table and took her hand. "Tomorrow when we walk into that hall, you're going to show him exactly what he threw away." And Marin, holding his hand in the candlelight, believed him. She just didn't know what was waiting. Nightmare's castle rose out of the dark, like something that drank the light. Black stone. Towers that scraped the low clouds. Marin stepped down from the carriage and looked up at it and took 3 slow breaths, and reminded herself that she was not the girl who had crawled out of this place 6 months ago. "Ready?" Corwin asked, offering his arm. She looked at his hand, at the castle, at his face. "Ready," she said, and they climbed the steps together. The moment they entered the great hall, every head turned, because Corwin was striking dark blue velvet golden hair tied back the easy power of a man born to lead. But it was Maren who stopped conversations mid-word. Maren, in emerald and silver, dark hair, falling in waves over bare shoulders, chin high back, straight, walking into the very hall where she had once pressed herself into a shadow and prayed not to be seen. She was not hiding now. The whispers started at once. Who is she by the moon? Look at her eyes. Different colors, wait. Wait, is that no? It can't be. Corwin bent his head close to hers. They're staring. Let them, Maren murmured, and there was a smile in it. I spent my whole life wishing to be invisible. Her eyes swept the hall level and unafraid. Turns out being seen is better. They crossed the floor toward the dais. Because protocol demanded that visiting alphas greet the host, and Maren intended to follow every rule of that hall to the letter. She intended to give Kyle nothing to fault. Nothing at all. Kyle stood at the center of it, ringed by advisors, a golden-haired woman on his arm. Delphine, red dress, cold, careful eyes, a necklace worth more than all of Thornvale glittering at her throat. Kale was mid-sentence when he saw Corwin approach, and he smiled the smooth political smile of a king greeting a king. Corwin of Dawn Hollow, he said, extending a hand. You honor my hall. The honor's mine, Corwin replied, and clasped it. And then Kale's eyes moved to the woman on Corwin's arm, and the smile died. Maren watched it happen. Watched the color drain from his face, watched the hand still gripping Corwin's go rigid, watched his dark eyes widen with a shock so total it was almost comic, except she was too busy savoring it to laugh. Maren, Kale breathed. Her name left him like he'd been struck in the stomach. She inclined her head. A small, cool, perfect nod. The kind you give a distant acquaintance you can barely place. Kale, she said, congratulations on your chosen one. Her gaze flicked to Delphine, polite and empty. May your union be prosperous. And she watched the words land like blades. Because this was not the trembling, barefoot girl he had catalogued and discarded. This was a woman in silk who looked at him as if he were furniture. As if the worst moment of her life had been to her a mild inconvenience she'd long since forgotten. Delphine's grip tightened on Kale's arm. Her eyes darted between them sharp with something that was fast becoming suspicion. You, Kale said, still staring at Maren like she was a ghost. You're with him. Maren is my most trusted advisor, Corwin said. Calm. But there was steel underneath it. And yes, she's with me tonight. I count myself fortunate for her company. I need to speak with you. Kyle's voice cracked out low and urgent, and he was looking only at Maren now, as if Delphine and Corwin and the whole watching hall had ceased to exist. Alone. Delphine's face went white with humiliation. There's nothing to discuss, Maren said simply, and she turned to go, then paused and delivered the final gentle blade over her shoulder. Enjoy your ball, Alpha King. I'm sure your chosen one is eager for your attention. It would be terribly rude to neglect her. She walked away, and she left the Alpha King of Nightmore standing frozen in the middle of his own celebration, staring after her, while the woman on his arm shook with rage beside him. Are you all right? Corwin asked when they'd put distance between themselves and the dais. Marin let out a slow breath, and then she smiled, surprised almost at her own answer. I am. I thought seeing him again would break something open. All that old pain. She shook her head. But there's nothing there. He's just a stranger. A man who made a terrible mistake. Her eyes found Corwin's and softened. I'm free of him. Truly free. Corwin covered her hand where it rested on his arm. Yet, he said, you are. The music began an elegant waltz that filled the vast hall. Couples drifted onto the floor. Across the room, Marin could see Delphine practically dragging Kyle to dance, trying to reclaim her place at his side. But his eyes kept straying, searching the crowd, searching for her. Corwin turned and offered his hand with formal grace. May I have this dance? Marin placed her hand in his. You may. He drew her close, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers, and they began to move. And they moved as if they'd been dancing together for years, because in a way they had. Because he'd taught her this too, in a sunlit room in Dawn Hollow, insisting an advisor needed to know how to move in society. You dance well, Corwin murmured. You taught me, she said, along with everything else. And look at you now. His blue eyes were warm, magnificent. She was so lost in him, his eyes, his hand, the warmth of him, that she almost forgot where she was, until a voice cut in. May I cut in? They stopped, turned. Kyle stood there. He had abandoned Delphine in the middle of the floor. Marin could see her frozen, red-faced being watched by a dozen whispering nobles. His hand was extended toward Marin, his expression tense, nearly pleading. Marin looked at his hand as if it were something that might bite, and then she decided to have a little fun. Oh, she said, her voice dripping with false regret. I'd love to, truly. But you see, I'm afraid I don't know how to dance. Kyle frowned. But you were just dancing. With him. Was I? Marin blinked, wide-eyed, the very picture of innocence. How strange. I must have a terrible condition. My feet simply stop working around certain people. A small sorrowful sigh. Very inconvenient. Comes and goes. Behind her, Corwin made a sound like a cough that was not in any way a cough. Several nobles, close enough to hear, did not bother to hide their laughter. Kyle's face flushed dark, rage and humiliation tangled together. Marin, I need to talk to you. And I need to get back to dancing, she said brightly, turning back to Corwin. With my partner, who fascinatingly does not make my feet develop mysterious ailments. She tilted her head all sweetness. Funny how that works, isn't it? And she stepped back into Corwin's arms and left Kyle standing alone in the middle of the dance floor, publicly rejected, while 100 eyes watched. Delphine made a strangled sound and fled the hall in tears. Corwin steered them away, and when they were far enough, he finally let the laughter loose, low and delighted. A terrible condition, he repeated. Marin, that was cruel. That was perfect. It's technically true, she said, mischief bright in her eyes. My feet have a serious and inexplicable problem dancing with men who publicly called me a curse. Must be a rare disorder. He laughed harder, and the sound of made nobles turn to look because it was rare indeed to see an alpha king so unguarded. But the night was not over. When the waltz ended, Corwin kept her hand in his. I need air, he murmured. Come with me. He led her through tall glass doors onto a terrace. The night air was cool and clean after the crush of the hall. Above them, the full moon hung enormous and silver, washing the gardens below in pale light. For a moment they just stood there, side by side at the stone balustrade, breathing. "Maren," Corwin said. She turned, and in the moonlight his face was open in a way she'd never quite seen it. "I can't pretend any more," he said. "Pretend what? That you're only my advisor." He lifted a hand slow, giving her every chance to pull away, and touched her cheek. "That I don't think of you constantly. That my heart doesn't stumble every time you walk into a room. That I'm not completely, hopelessly in love with you." Maren's breath caught. "I know you've been hurt," he went on, quiet and rough, "in ways I'll never fully understand. And I know I'm not the bond the moon chose for you. I never can be. That part of me was spent long ago for a peace that saved a generation." His thumb brushed her cheekbone. "But I don't need fate to tell me what I want. I choose you, Maren. Not because the gods command it, because every day I wake up and choose you all over again. And I'll go on choosing you for as long as you'll let me." The tears came, but they were the good kind now, the kind she was still learning existed. "You taught me something," she whispered, her own hand rising to cover his. "When you found me, I believed every cruel thing anyone ever said. That I was worthless, cursed." She drew a shaking breath. "You taught me to see myself the way you see me. And somewhere in all of that," her voice broke and steadied, "I fell in love with you too. Not because anyone made me, because I chose it. Because you're the first person who ever looked at all of me and didn't flinch." Corwin closed the last of the distance. And when his lips found hers, gentle and certain under the full moon, Maren felt something she had never once felt in her whole hard life. She felt chosen. She felt safe. She felt loved. And then a voice cut through the dark. "Maren." They broke apart, turned. Kyle stood at the terrace doors, his chest heaving, his face a wreck of rage and jealousy, and something that looked horribly like grief. "Get your hands off her," he said. Corwin didn't move. He simply stayed at Maren's side. "Watch your tone. She's mine." The word tore out of Kyle, and it echoed. From the hall behind him, faces began to appear in the doorway, drawn by the raised voices. Nobles, whispers, scandal spreading like fire. And Maren stepped forward. "Yours," she repeated, and her voice was low and dangerous and did not shake at all. "I was never yours, Kyle. You made sure of that. In front of everyone. I made a mistake." His voice cracked. "I see that now. Look at you. I was always this. Cold. Certain. You were just too blind to see it. My wolf never accepted the rejection." He took a step onto the terrace, desperate now. "The bond words tore it, but your scent stayed in my soul. Elder Thaddeus says a king can try to reverse a rejection. Blood and ritual. It's rare, but no. Maren, please." And the proud Alpha King of Nightmore dropped to his knees on the cold stone in front of everyone. "I beg you. I was wrong. Terribly wrong. Just give me one chance." And Maren looked down at him, and she felt not triumph, not the sweet revenge she might have imagined once. She felt pity. "Get up, Kyle," she said quietly. "Please, get up." And there was something almost gentle in it now. "It won't change anything. But you should know the truth before you humiliate yourself further." And that was when she said it, loud enough for the whole watching hall to hear. "Do you even know why I nearly died 6 months ago?" Kale went still. "After you cast me out," Maren said, "I ran, and in the forest 2 hunters found me, and they beat me half to death, and left me in a stream to die." Her voice rang out clear and steady across the silent terrace. "I always thought it was bad luck. Cursed eyes, cursed girl, wrong place, wrong time." A pause. But it wasn't luck. Was it Delphine? Every head turned. Delphine stood in the doorway, having crept back to watch her rival's downfall. And now the color drained from her face so fast she swayed. "I don't," she started. "I have no idea what." "The hunters were paid," Marin said, "in silver, 3 nights before the gathering, by a golden-haired woman in a red dress who was very, very afraid that a broken bond might not stay broken." She looked at Delphine, and her mismatched eyes were merciless and calm. "You couldn't risk me coming back, so you tried to make sure I never could." Gasps rippled through the crowd. "That's a lie," Delphine hissed. "She's making it up." "Am I?" Marin said. "Then it should be simple to disprove." The younger of the 2 hunters had a scar across his cheek. "He's a tracker from the eastern villages, and I imagine if the Alpha King cared to have him questioned, he'd remember exactly whose silver he took." She tilted her head. "Shall we find out?" The silence was total, and Kael, still on his knees, turned slowly to look at the woman he had chosen, at Delphine. And Marin watched the truth arrive on his face like a wound opening. "You," Kael said. His voice had gone very quiet and very terrible. "You tried to have her killed." "Kael, get her out of my sight," he said to his guards. He did not raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Now!" Delphine's composure shattered. She screamed something half fury and half fear as the guards closed around her, and then she was gone, dragged from the hall, her golden hair coming loose, her red dress a smear of color disappearing into the crowd. And Kael knelt on the cold stone alone in the ruins of his celebration. He looked up at Marin, and there was no crown in his face now, just a man who had thrown away the one thing the moon had ever offered him, out of fear, out of cowardice, out of a lie. An old man had whispered in the dark. "There was a prophecy," he said hollowly. "Thaddeus told me a mate with divided eyes would bring Nightmore to ruin. I thought I was protecting the kingdom. I thought." His voice broke. "I threw you away to save a throne, and it was a lie. It was all a lie." And here at last was the truth of Kael. He had not been a monster. He had been a coward. A man who had believed the wrong voice, feared the wrong thing, and paid for it with the only love fate ever gave him. "I know," Marin said softly, because somewhere in the last 6 months she had stopped hating him. There simply hadn't been room, not with everything else that had grown in its place. But Kael was not finished, because grief in a proud man has a way of turning into rage. He rose from his knees, and he turned to Corwin, and his face hardened into something reckless. "Then let it be settled the old way," he said, and his voice rose to fill the hall. "I, Kael Alpha, King of Nightmore, challenge you, Corwin of Dawn Hollow, to an Alpha duel." The crowd erupted. "Kael, no," Marin stepped forward. "It's the old law," Kael said, not looking at her. "When 2 Alphas contest a mate, the duel decides. At dawn. In wolf form." "Marin is not a prize to be won," Corwin said, and his voice had gone dangerously cold. "Then prove it," Kael snapped. "Or are you afraid?" And Marin saw the trap of it. Saw that Kael, drowning in his own guilt, needed something to fight, some way to bleed for what he'd done. She grabbed Corwin's arm. "Don't," she whispered. "You don't have to. Not for me. You are worth everything, Corwin said, and he lifted her hand and pressed it to his lips right there in front of the whole watching hall. But you're right. I won't fight him, because I think I own you. No one owns you. Not him. Not me. Not the moon itself. He turned to Kael. I'll accept your challenge, he said, but hear why. Not because I have any claim over her. I fight because you looked at something extraordinary and called it cursed. Because you broke her in front of this whole kingdom and then hid behind a lie. And because everyone who watched you do it, his voice rose, ringing off the black stone, is going to watch me say what you should have said 6 months ago. She was always worthy. And I will defend that truth with my life. A murmur ran through the crowd, and it was not Marin realized on Kael's side. An old man stepped from the shadows, Elder Thaddeus Gray, and stooped the very man who had whispered the lie that started all of it. His face was strange, troubled. I will witness the challenge, he said in a voice that carried. An alpha duel at dawn in wolf form until submission or death. He paused, and his old eyes moved to Marin, and something in them flickered guilt, perhaps, or fear. Hear this. When 2 kings shed blood over a she-wolf, the moon has marked with a divided gaze the moon takes her price, and she does not always take it from the one who fights. A cold thread of dread wound down Marin's spine, but Corwin only nodded. So be it. They gave Corwin guest quarters for the night. Marin refused to leave his side. She sat with him as he cleaned and readied himself as he moved through old drills to loosen his shoulders, and she watched him with her heart in her throat. He's brutal, she said. The stories he's never shown mercy in a duel. Corwin, if something happens to you because of me, look at me. He took her face in his hands. I'm not going to lose. You can't promise that. I can, because he's fighting for wounded pride. Corwin pressed his forehead to hers. And I'm fighting for you. A man who fights for pride gets tired. A man who fights for love doesn't stop. He kissed her soft. Trust me. I do, she whispered. I'm so afraid. And he held her, while she let herself just for a moment be afraid. Because she had learned that, too, in Dawn Hollow. That being held was not the same as being weak. Dawn came gray and cold. The dueling ground was a ring of ancient stone in the castle gardens, ringed now with tiers of watchers. Hundreds of them. Noble servants, guards the whole of Nightmoor, come to see 2 kings tear at each other over a woman most of them had spat on 6 months before. Marin sat in the witness's place, hands knotted in her lap, flanked by the Dawn Hollow guards. Corwin had insisted stay near her. Kael entered first. Bare-chested black hair, tied back old scars, mapping a body built for violence. The crowd roared for him. Their king. Then Corwin. Golden hair bound back calm as still water, and his blue eyes found Marin in the stands, and held there. And he smiled, small, steady. Sure. It'll be all right, that smile said. She tried to smile back. She couldn't. Elder Thaddeus raised both hands. Witnesses of the moon, today we bear witness to an alpha duel. He looked between them. Do you both understand the terms? I do, said Corwin. I do, said Kael. Then let the moon decide. And they shifted. It was brutal to watch bone-breaking and reforming, fur erupting. 2 men becoming 2 great wolves, one black as pitch, one gold as morning. And the moment the change was done, Kael attacked. No warning, 3 massive bounds, and he was on Corwin's jaws, snapping for the throat. But Corwin moved sideways, fast, fluid, and Kael's teeth closed on empty air, his own weight carrying him past. Corwin's claws raked his flank as he went. First blood. The crowd screamed, because Kael was stronger, heavier, every inch the brutal warrior the stories told. But Corwin was faster, smarter. He'd taught a broken girl to turn strength against strength, and now he showed the whole kingdom what he'd meant. Kael lunged again, feinting, and this time Corwin read it half a beat too slow. Massive jaws clamped down on his shoulder and drove deep. Marin's hands flew to her mouth. Blood welled dark against gold fur. But Corwin used Kael's own weight and sank his teeth into the black wolf's ear. Kael yelped and tore free, and they broke apart, both bleeding, now circling. It went on. 5 minutes. 10. Both wolves torn and panting. And slowly, the thing that Corwin had promised began to come true. Because rage burns hot and burns out. Kael's attacks grew wild, wilder, all fury and no thought, and that was his undoing. Corwin ducked beneath a reckless charge, slid under the black wolf's guard. A move Marin knew, a move he'd taught her in a sunlit yard a lifetime ago, and raked his claws across Kael's belly as he passed. Kael roared, spun, and in his blind fury lunged one last time, careless spent. Corwin waited until the last possible breath. Then he moved not aside, but straight in under the gaping jaws, and his own jaws closed around Kael's throat. Not hard enough to kill, hard enough to end it. The whole arena went silent. Kael struggled and found he could not move without dying. For 3 long heartbeats they held there, the golden wolf's teeth at the black wolf's throat. And then Kael went still, and slowly, he bared his throat. Submission. Corwin released him and stepped back, and the arena erupted half in cheers, half in shock, all of it stunned. Corwin shifted back to a man slick with blood wounds, gaping but standing. Kael shifted too, and dropped to his knees in the dust, defeated. "You're strong," Corwin said, breathing hard. "But strength was never the point." And then his legs gave out. He dropped to his knees as the blood loss caught him, and Marin was already running, already there, sliding to the ground at his side, hands flying to his wounds. "Corwin, there's so much blood. I'm all right." His voice was faint, but his eyes found hers. "I told you. It was worth it." And here was where the moon took her price. Not in death, not in the way anyone had feared, but in that single, endless moment when Marin knelt in the dust with her love bleeding in her arms and did not know if he would live. The moon reached into her and asked a question. Would you give anything? Would you trade all your hard-won strength, all your careful walls, to keep this one man breathing? And Marin answered, without a heartbeat's hesitation, "Yes, anything, everything." And in answering, she understood fully, finally, that her heart had chosen, not been given, not been commanded, chosen, the way Corwin had chosen her every single day. That was the price. To love so completely that losing it could break you. To be that open, that undefended, ever again. She paid it gladly. The healer reached them and went to work, and after a long, terrible moment, looked up. He'll live. Nothing fatal, but he needs rest, and a great deal of it. And Marin pressed her forehead to Corwin's, and wept not from grief now, but from the enormous, terrifying relief of a woman who had almost lost everything and hadn't. Across the arena, Kyle knelt alone in the dust, watching them, watching the way she held the way she looked at him, and at last, at long, long last, Kyle understood what he had thrown away. He had not only lost the duel, he had lost her entirely and forever, and he had done it to himself 6 months ago in a great stone hall. Elder Thaddeus came to him quietly. "It's decided. You can make no claim on her now." "I know," Kale said, and there was no fight left in him, only the hollow ache of a man who had learned the truth too late. He rose. He crossed the arena to where Marin knelt beside Corwin, and the whole hall held its breath. But Kyle did not rage, did not plead. He simply stopped a few paces away and looked at the woman he had called cursed and said the only thing that mattered. "I'm sorry." Marin looked up. "Not because I lost," Kale said. "Not because you're this now. I'm sorry for what I did in that hall, to a frightened girl in a torn dress who never did anything but hope I'd see her." His voice was raw. "You deserved to be seen, and I was too small a man to do it. That's my shame. Not yours, it was never yours." And Marin, kneeling in the dust with the man she loved, bleeding and breathing in her arms, looked up at the man who had broken her and found that the anger was truly finally gone. "I forgive you, Kyle," she said, and she meant it, not because he had earned it, but because she had finally learned the last lesson that forgiveness was never a gift you gave to the one who wronged you. It was a chain you struck from your own 2 wrists. It was the last door out of that great stone hall, and she was walking through it free. Kyle closed his eyes, bowed his head, and then he turned and walked away out of the arena to begin the long, slow work of becoming a better man than he had been. 2 years passed, and the kingdom of Dawn Hollow had never known such peace. Under Corwin and Marin, for she was his Luna now had been for a year and a half since the spring after his wounds had healed, and he'd knelt in the garden and asked her properly, the kingdom flourished, not only in strength but in something rarer, in justice, in mercy, in the quiet, radical idea that a person's worth was not written in the color of their eyes or the state of their dress. Marin, whose gaze had once marked her, a curse was known now across all the northern kingdoms as the wisest and kindest Luna in living memory. And because of her, because a girl with mismatched eyes had become a queen, mothers across the packs no longer hid children who were born different. They brought them into the light. They called them lucky. The love between the Golden King and his mismatched Luna became a story that mothers told their daughters. Not a love the moon had forced. A love 2 people had built, board by board, from the wreckage of everything they'd each survived. On a quiet afternoon, Marin walked the castle gardens with Corwin's hand in hers, and Nan Agatha dozing in a chair in the sun nearby, a shawl over her old knees. "Any word from Nightmore?" Marin asked. "Kale married," Corwin said. "A quiet match, they say. Respectful. He rules softer than he used to. Fairer." A pause. "They say he changed." "Good," Marin said. "And she meant that, too. I hope he's found some peace." Corwin stopped and turned to look at her, and there was wonder in his face, the same wonder that had never quite faded in 2 years. "You astonish me. You know that to wish him well, after everything." Marin smiled and lifted her face to the afternoon sun and let it warm her strange and lovely eyes. "He hurt me," she said simply. "That's true. But that pain is what sent me running. And running is what brought me to you." She looked at him. "So in the end, I'm grateful for all of it, even the worst of it, because it led here." Corwin pulled her into his arms. "I love you," he said, as he said it every day. "My extraordinary Luna. And I love you," Marin answered, as she answered every day. "My king, who taught me how to see myself." And when they kissed there in the garden in the golden afternoon, with an old woman dozing in the sun and a kingdom flourishing around them, and children somewhere laughing, who would never be told they were cursed, they both knew they had found the rarest thing in all the world. Not a love that was given, a love that was chosen, every single day, for as long as they both would live, and that in the end is the truest kind there is.